In this video, I'm going to be talking about stress, anxiety, and arousal. First of all, I'm going to be talking and going over what arousal, stress, and anxiety actually is and some different types. Then I'm going to be relating all this information to two different sporting scenarios. Stress is all about the demands placed upon a person. The way the body reacts, either physically, mentally, or emotionally, to certain situations is known as stress. Lazarus and Folkman in 1984 stated that stress is a pattern of negative physiological states and responses going on in circumstances where threat makes a person assume that their well-being is at risk as they are unable to meet it. Later on, Lazarus added some more supporting information about what stress is. He said that it is also about the assumed ability to manage or adapt to the demands. An example of a situation where someone may feel stressed is if they've lost their job or if they're going through a divorce. However, different people will interpret and feel stress in different situations and under different circumstances. There are two different kinds of stress: eustress and distress. Eustress is known as good stress or healthy stress. This type of stress can help a performer with their concentration levels by making them more focused and motivated, providing them with a sense of challenge and just overall improving a player's performance. Then distress is the complete opposite. It's a bad stress, worry, or a perceived inability to meet the demands. It is an intense and severe form of anxiety and worry. It can worsen an individual's performance by reducing energy, and it feels very unpleasant for the person, and it can also lead to mental fatigue. There are 4 different stages which make up the stress process, and the stress process is what I'm going to be talking about now. So the first stage, which makes up the stress process, is the first being a demand, okay? So a demand is put upon an individual. It can be either physical, cognitive, or somatic. The next stage involves the individual making an observation or perception of that demand in relation to their ability to encounter the demand. The stress process then continues if the individual sees that there is a disproportion in what they're being asked to do and what they can actually do. And then stage 3 is to do with the individual's psychological or physiological stress experience. It is the individual's response to the perceived circumstance. And then the final stage of the stress process is about the outcome and the behaviour of the individual. The individual's performance may decrease or increase as a result. There are many different symptoms of stress. These symptoms can either be somatic, cognitive, or behavioural. Somatic symptoms are usually as a result of the sympathetic nervous system kicking in. The sympathetic nervous system is part of the autonomic nervous system. It is involved in the fight or flight response. It reacts to threat or danger and aids in survival. It does this by increasing the heart rate and the breathing rate, diverting most blood from the stomach, organs, and other parts of the body to the muscles, increasing heat production, metabolism, adrenaline, muscle tension, and also increases sweating. Also, the pupils dilate for increased vision. These are some of the somatic symptoms of stress. The parasympathetic nervous system is the opposite of the sympathetic. It then kicks in once the threat or danger has passed, and it brings the body back down to homeostasis by decreasing the heart rate and breathing rate, etc., and bringing the body back down to normal levels. Cognitive symptoms of stress involve mental symptoms such as reduced concentration because the individual may be distracted. There can be loss of humour, esteem, enthusiasm, increased amounts of worrying. The individuals may experience being unable to relax, focus, and pay attention. This can lead to more mistakes being made. And then finally, some behavioural symptoms of stress include things like, doing talking and walking very quickly, interrupting conversations, feeling, very fidgety, shaky a lot, which can also lead to accidents occurring. Also, individuals may have many mood swings or be constantly very moody and go through phases where they're either overeating or smoking, etc. There are 6 different stressors at which certain situations or circumstances cause stressful responses. These include the sports environment, personal life, lifestyle factors, occupation, external and internal. Sports environment causes of stress could be pressure from parents, scouts, teammates, the coach, audiences, fans. These can all put pressure and stress, as they may be chanting, booing, shouting abuse, just general pressure, which can add to extra stress on the players. Stress can also be triggered by competition. If the competition are very good, or if they're catching up goal-wise, stress may be felt by players. Furthermore, event importance also adds stress, as a final in any sport will mean a lot to players and they'll want to win, and so the players may feel additional stress, as every wrong move that they do could cost them the game. Personal life and lifestyle factors causes stress, such as family. If someone's having many arguments, or someone in a person's family is ill, this can cause a person to feel stress. Or if someone feels isolated and alone, stress can build up. Lifestyle factors, such as smoking a lot or drinking, can also present additional stress. If someone's wanting to quit but can't, or social disapproval occurs and the family disagrees with them smoking, and many more. So occupations such as having sponsors or having pressure to win can cause stress. If you have a sponsor, there is pressure to perform well, as you'll be representing that brand or being paid to perform well, and so bad performance could result in a loss of sponsors. Furthermore, coaches can add to additional stress by placing many targets upon a player. These targets and goals can make an individual feel stressed, as they'll feel that they need to meet these targets set in order for them to improve, but they may not be meeting these targets and so will feel stressed. Next is about how internal things can cause stress. For example, injury. If someone is injured, they may feel stressed about how long their recovery will be, how bad their injury is, if any sponsors would be lost, and many more. Pressure can also cause stress. Pressure can be from other teammates, coaches, the audience, etc. A person may feel a lot has been placed on their shoulders and think that their performance may decline due to added pressure. Lack of sleep can also lead to stress as well as illness. And then finally, external is about the environment. Weather and the environment can cause stress. For example, in netball, if the weather conditions are awful, it's raining, the courts may be slippery, and the ball may be wet. This will therefore make it harder to pass the ball, etc., so stress can occur. Or if the environment is very noisy, it could be a major distraction, leading to a person feeling stressed, as it's putting them off their game. Other external factors, such as major life events, can lead to stress. For example, the death of a family member. This can lead to stress, as the individual will obviously be feeling heartbroken and not wanting to do anything, but then also feeling that they need to keep up and keep playing matches, and also keep up with their training, but they feel they need to be with the rest of their family. This will put stress upon the individual. Anxiety is about experiencing feelings of worry, doubts, or fear. Buckwork and Dishman in 2002 stated that anxiety is a negative state of worry, apprehension, or tension that is usually due to some form of danger. When we are in intimidating situations where we feel vulnerable, we have uncertainty about our capacity to handle them. Increased arousal is usually linked with negative emotional states. For example, someone may have anxiety over a netball match coming up, as they are a shooter and all they can think about is if they mess up or keep on missing. There are different types of anxiety. These are cognitive and somatic anxiety. Cognitive anxiety is mental and psychological, whereas somatic anxiety is physiological. Cognitive anxiety is the thought aspect of anxiety. It is linked to negative evaluation of performance via feeling worried and fear. It is the total amount an individual worries. Cognitive anxiety is usually triggered by stress. McNally said that cognitive anxiety is when an individual doesn't feel that they are performing very well. They have worries about their skill level and any consequences that are linked to their failure. An example of cognitive anxiety is feeling worried or concerned. But somatic anxiety is more about the symptoms of anxiety. It's the physical aspect of anxiety which is triggered by cognitive anxiety. Some examples of somatic anxiety would be feeling butterflies in the stomach, having an increased heart rate and blood pressure. Somatic state anxiety is about an individual's perception of any physiological changes that occur in certain circumstances in the body. Physiological change includes things like having clammy hands or a high heart rate. There are two different types of anxiety: state and trait anxiety. Trait anxiety is all about consistency. It stays the same everywhere. Anxiety tends to occur in all situations and leads to a general decrease in performance. People showing trait anxiety are consistent in their behaviour, whereas state anxiety is changeable and changes in situations. The anxiety occurs in certain situations and it can come and go. It's a very in-the-moment feeling. And then there's also a thing called competitive anxiety. Competitive anxiety is something which nearly all athletes experience in their occupation from time to time. It is when the requirements of training or the competition go beyond an athlete's perceived ability, or the athlete sees the situation as possibly threatening. This therefore leads to the athlete's stress levels increasing. Many top athletes train in order to be able to control anxiety and stresses at important times. Anxiety is felt by the elite and average sports individuals before and throughout the game or sport. It's completely normal. There are two main factors affecting anxiety. These are personal factors and situational factors. Personal factors include things like an individual's self-esteem, trait anxiety, or social physique anxiety. Social physique anxiety is feeling concerned or distress related with the perceived evaluation of an individual's physical self. This can affect anxiety. If someone doesn't feel they're physically good enough to compete compared to other players, this can affect their performance, and the increased anxiety could lead to a decrease in performance. Self-esteem can affect someone's anxiety, as someone with high self-esteem is more likely to have lower anxiety, as they'll be more confident in their ability. But someone with low self-esteem won't be as confident, and they will only look at the negative things in their performance, opposed to all the positive things. This can lead to anxiety, as they may not think they're good enough to be playing, and so therefore their performance is most likely to drop. Trait anxiety affects performance by increasing an individual's nerves as the heart rate and blood pressure increases. The increased anxiety can sometimes have negative effects on performance, as adrenaline is released into the bloodstream due to the fight or flight response being triggered by increased anxiety. Situational factors are those based on uncertainty and game importance. The game importance will increase anxiety as players are more determined to win. If it was a final, players would be much more determined to win compared to if it was just a friendly, and so players will be more nervous as it means a lot more to them. When an important game occurs for players, sometimes the individual with high trait anxiety will have a more elevated arousal and state anxiety because they are ready and perceive most competitive situations as somewhat threatening. This would therefore mean that the individual will move more closely to their optimal level of arousal and state anxiety, whereas a competitor with low state anxiety might not perceive the situation as very important because they do not feel threatened, and so the level of its arousal and state anxiety will stay low, and so getting to the optimal performance will be much harder. The contact of personal factors and situational factors is a more advanced predictor of arousal, state anxiety, and performance than each set of factors by itself. There are many different ways to measure anxiety via questionnaires, observations, and psychologically. Because anxiety is mainly an emotional feeling, this makes it very hard to measure. Questionnaires are the main way in which anxiety is measured. Questionnaires just involve an individual answering questions about anxiousness, physical aspects, and general lifestyle. The questionnaire helps to put people onto the anxiety scale. Then, based on the results, any or no treatment will be determined. The next way anxiety can be measured is by observations. Observations involve looking at social interaction and anxiety around that. Observing change in an individual's social life and their interactions is a way in which anxiety can be measured, due to the changes in anxiety levels. And then finally, anxiety can be measured physiologically. I realised that I said psychologically earlier as a way to measure anxiety. It's actually physiologically. So anyway, carrying on from that. So anxiety can be measured physiologically. It's shown that people who are more anxious tend to display higher blood pressure, increased heart rate, muscles being tight and tense. Heart rate monitors can also be used to test an individual's heart rate, and blood pressure mechanisms can be used. Results from these mechanisms can show how anxious an individual may be, as long as the individual didn't have any other medical conditions which may influence the readings on these mechanisms. Arousal is a mixture of psychological and physiological action in an individual. It is known as the level of enthusiasm, awareness, and excitement at a certain time. It's all about the amount or level of readiness used by an individual to perform, or the level needed to get the body ready for action. One part of the nervous system is called the autonomic nervous system. It's responsible for controlling involuntary movements of the non-skeletal muscles. Then, branching off the ANS, autonomic nervous system, is a sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is involved in the fight or flight response. Then, the opposite of the sympathetic nervous system is the parasympathetic nervous system, which brings the body back down to homeostasis. In addition to that, there's something else which regulates arousal called the RAS. The RAS stands for the Reticular Activating System. It's responsible for controlling levels of arousal and keeping an eye on levels of stimulation. The RAS is part of the central nervous system, which is found at the bottom part of the brainstem. It's responsible for the stimulation of the cerebral cortex. When the stimulation occurs, the cerebral cortex becomes very excited and therefore has high levels of arousal. An individual's level of arousal is about how ready a person is to perform, in the sense of the level of distraction, awareness, and how alert the person is ready to take on and complete specific tasks effectively. It's stated that increased levels of arousal improve performance, but the performance will only improve up until the optimal level of arousal is achieved. There is extreme under or over arousal. Extreme under arousal could be due to the individual experiencing tiredness, fatigue, or certain illnesses. Then extreme over arousal could be down to a range of symptoms from the environment, the task at hand, and many others. It could lead to withdrawal, rather irrational behavior being displayed, or mood swings. Over-arousal causes an individual to lose focus and attention. Muscle tension can also be caused by over-arousal, and too much tension can cause difficulties. Attention is the main thing affected by over-arousal. Attention can become narrowed with over-arousal, and with under-arousal it can make an individual pay attention to their environment too much. Then, between these two extremes is the point of optimal arousal, which I've spoken about it being a good level for the individual to be at, as they'll perform most effectively at this point. There are two different types of arousal, somatic and cognitive. Somatic is physiological, whereas cognitive is psychological. Somatic is all about how our body shows our levels of arousal. It's to do with the changing state of the body. For example, an individual's heart rate, blood pressure, and breathing rate may increase. Then cognitive anxiety is all about the mind. During this kind of arousal, things such as negative thoughts or worries occur, those of which both are considered very changeable as they vary from situation to situation. Arousal can impact performance in many different ways. There are many different theories of arousal. These include drive theory, inverted U theory, and catastrophe theory. And then also, on the side of that, eyes off. Drive theory was proposed by Hull in 1943 and Spence and Spence in 1966. This is a graph for drive theory, as we can see. On the x-axis is the level of arousal occurring, and on the y-axis we have the quality of performance. Then we have a diagonal line increasing linearly. This graph is showing that as the level of arousal increases, so does the performance, or the quality of performance also increases. The graph is basically showing that there's a relationship between performance and arousal. This is an equation for which it is performance equals your habit times the drive. Your habit is what's considered on the y-axis, and it's basically another way of saying your performance increases. It's saying it's not just the quality of performance increasing, but the dominant habit is more likely to be performed. So as arousal increases and the individual is more likely to perform their dominant skill, and so therefore the quality of performance will increase. The theory says that the more aroused you are, the better your performance will be. The quality of your performance depends on how well the skill has been learned. It's said if you are more aroused, the dominant response or skill will be performed. Some positive things of drive theory is that it is true for simple skills, as when arousal increases, so does the performance. It is also true for experienced performers, as when they know the correct technique, so when they are more aroused, the more dominant skills will come into play. For them, the dominant technique is correct, and so their performance will increase and get better. Furthermore, the theory is also true for when someone has learnt the skill really well. The dominant response is the correct one, so will help them in their play and their performance will increase. But some criticisms of the theory is that if someone's a beginner, they are most likely to have not know the correct technique, and if the beginner is performing in front of a crowd for the first time and they're getting increasingly aroused, but they don't have the correct technique, they'll often make mistakes under the pressure from the crowd. So when the individual gets more aroused, it's most likely that the individual will revert back and play the skill which isn't learnt correctly, and so won't perform it very well. This shows that if you're a beginner, that it's best to have low levels of arousal if you're going to play well. Whereas an individual who is more experienced, they have correct technique, they will have or need higher levels of arousal so they can complete their skill to the best and do their best performance. In addition to that, even the most experienced players fail and make mistakes in their performance when they are extremely aroused and not perform their skill necessarily better. In relation to, let's say, a famous basketball player, according to drive theory, the more aroused they become, the better their performance. For the elite players, the dominant response is how they usually play, which is at a high level standard. Throughout the game, the pressure is on. The players will probably be increasing arousal from the crowd, and the player will be getting more aroused. Drive theory states as pressure increases, the player's ability to perform will keep on increasing and have no limits. Also, drive theory automatically assumes that low arousal for a performer will mean that they are not performing properly or performing poorly. But everyone has a different level of arousal required to perform at their best, and so some people may perform best when they have low levels of arousal. An example of drive theory in either badminton or netball. So in badminton, if there's a beginner and for a backhand smash in badminton, they start off by learning the wrong technique and they have a competition with crowd watching and they've never been taught the correct technique, but the crowd is increasing the performer's arousal, they'll go back to the wrongly learnt backhand and therefore mistakes will be made. And so in netball, for example, if a netball beginner starts off by learning a chest pass incorrectly, the wrong technique, with all the wrong technique, then when they come into a game with a crowd and pressure, they'll be feeling very nervous and more aroused. They will then use their incorrect technique, so therefore their performance would decrease. The next theory I'm going to be talking about is inverted U theory, which was proposed by Whitaker-Jones in 1908. The graph looks like an inverted U. This theory talks about how arousal relates to performance. The graph shows at different points of the U, different performance is displayed. At the bottom corner, poor performance is occurring. Then in the middle, it's the maximum performance, and then at the end, it's again poor performance. Showing that at A, when arousal is low, performance is also low. This is when the performer is what's known as being under-aroused. At this stage, usually it means that the performer isn't focused enough and is being easily distracted and so can't play their best. Then the opposite of this end is at C, and this is showing that when the performer has high arousal and poor performance. This is known as an individual when they are being over-aroused. Here, the arousal turns into anxiety, panic, and the performance decreases. So there are two extremes at different ends. Then directly in the middle of these 2 points is the area called optimal arousal. This is when the best performance is carried out. This is with moderate levels of arousal. At B, the performer is playing at their best and they are completely focused and concentrated. Every athlete wants to be performing at their optimum level so that they are performing at their best ability. Inverted U theory suggests that when the performer gets up to that level and starts becoming over-aroused, there's a gradual decline in performance and the individual performance gradually declines and gets worse. There's another graph for inverted U which compares complex and fine skills to the level of arousal required to complete them. The graph shows that fine movements and complex skills, which are information processing tasks, such as a shot in snooker, requires a lower level of arousal than simple gross motor skills, such as doing a tackle in rugby. A simple gross motor skill requires a high level of arousal, which helps skills requiring speed and strength. A complex fine task requires a lower level of arousal to reach a higher performance level than a simple gross task, which needs a higher level of arousal to reach a higher performance level. The simple gross skill doesn't get as higher optimum performance as the complex skill. Some strengths about this theory is that it takes into account poor performance, can be down to being under or over aroused. One criticism is that mistakes can be made due to exhaustion. Being exhausted can make a player do a lot of little mistakes, resulting in loss of points. The individual may be over-aroused or under-aroused, and so not in their optimum level, meaning they are not playing at the best of their ability. Someone may be at their optimum level, then when the exhaustion kicks in, they start to drop below the optimum level, meaning their performance drops. Also, there is a question of does optimal arousal and best performance always happen in the middle point of the curve, or can it vary? Because everyone has a different preferred level of arousal and different optimal levels, and so some people may perform best at low or high arousal, not necessarily directly in the middle between them both. In netball, according to the inverted U theory, if an individual has reached their optimal arousal, they'll be playing it in the perfect game with few mistakes. Reaching their optimal level means that they'll be playing very well. If the player or if the individual is played excellently, they may become over-aroused, which therefore results in a decrease in performance and mistakes being made. In badminton, if a player is feeling a lot of pressure because it's match point or something, the player may let the pressure get to them too much and so mess up and hit the shuttlecock out of court. This is an example of the performer coming over-aroused and leading to mistakes. Now I'm going to talk about the catastrophe theory, which was proposed by Hardy and Fazey in 1988. The theory explains how arousal can be affected by cognitive and somatic anxiety. When cognitive anxiety is low and somatic anxiety is high, the inverted U is followed. As physiological arousal is increasing, as does performance, gradually up to an optimal level. Then, with high arousal, performance gradually decreases. It looks like the inverted U and follows a similar pattern. Whereas, when cognitive anxiety is high and somatic anxiety is high, it's completely different. The beginning part shows the physiological arousal increases and performance does up to a moderate level. But after the optimal point, when cognitive anxiety and physiological arousal are both very high, there's a sudden, what's known as a catastrophic drop in performance, where there's a sudden decline instead of just a gradual decrease in performance. But if cognitive anxiety can drop and be reduced, and arousal can be reduced, there's a potential to be able to perform better again. But if the performer stays highly aroused, then the performance will continue to just get worse. So when there's high cognitive anxiety and somatic anxiety, the sudden catastrophic drop in performance will be greater, and regaining the ability to perform well after is out of the question. So, some strengths of this theory is that there have been much research backing up this theory, and research agrees with the relationship. However, some criticisms of the theory is that the testing of this can be very difficult, and there are very many questions asked, such as, can the performance then be predicted? It's also criticised as it doesn't have practical applications, therefore making the model not so useful. Relating this to a game of netball or something, one of the best netball players on a team starts to play really badly because the pressure from a scout who is watching them as a potential sponsor. They then suddenly feel the pressure and keep throwing the ball to the other team, making lots of silly mistakes. Their performance then starts to drop rapidly. However, the coach then speaks to her and reassures her, and so she feels more relaxed and her performance can then start to improve again. And then in relation to, say, a badminton player, so a badminton player has just won the semi-final, a huge tournament, they've been playing amazingly and have had a chance of winning. On the day of the final, he is playing really well, but then the pressure starts to get to him, and then his performance starts dramatically dropping. The next theory I'm going to be talking about is eyes off. Eyes off stands for individual zones of optimal functioning. It displays the relationship between arousal and performance. This model was proposed by Hannon in 1997. Eyes off states that there are individual differences in the way people react to anxiety. Some individuals will succeed when anxiety is low, whereas some individuals will succeed when anxiety is high, therefore saying that anxiety is helpful in some cases and can have advantageous aspects. Everyone has their own preferred level of anxiety that allows them to perform their best. Hannon found that athletes who are professionals succeed when anxiety levels were low compared to others who have better success when anxiety was high. Hannon ended up concluding that every athlete can produce their own or their best performance at their own optimal level of anxiety. It said that there are many different individual factors affecting eyes off, such as personality, the task type, stage of learning, the amount of experience the athletes have, etc. These individual differences are then placed together, and the individual is placed onto either a low zone functioning or a high zone functioning. This then explains which level of anxiety the individual performs best at. So, for example, a tennis player keeps on doing double faults in a semi-final match. This is because they are under a lot of pressure. This is showing that anxiety is getting to the individual, and that the individual performs best at low or moderate levels of anxiety, and the high level of anxiety makes the player's performance decline. Relating this to netball, a netball shooter continues to get the ball in because she's calm, focused, and relaxed. She performs best with low anxiety. As let's say a badminton player continues to win the point due to their powerful smashes, even though there's a lot of pressure and they experiences high levels of anxiety. They thrive off the pressure and perform best with high levels of anxiety. So it's therefore showing that different people prefer different levels of anxiety. Some positive things about this theory is that there's been a lot of research that backed it up and found similar findings, therefore making the theory much more reliable, and it also is considered a better predictor than the inverted U theory.